Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where people get exactly what they deserve. And guys, in today's episode, OP tells a tale where they get revenge on their scummy ex who cheats and then has the audacity to empty the bank accounts. Absurd, right? Guys, I hope you enjoyed the other stories as well. Hit subscribe if you haven't. And as always, your stories can be linked or sent to this email right here. So when I was in university, I started dating this guy. At first, the guy was wonderful, dedicated to his studies, fun to be around, attentive, always surprising me with things and working hard at his job, etc. And then, bit by bit, things unraveled. The guy starts skipping classes, and then he barely bothered to go at all. Worse still is he never helped around the house. The guy never washed up, he never cleaned up, never did laundry, nothing. He was even fired from his job for too many no-shows. All he wanted to do was sit at home and play Xbox or browse the message boards and forums. This left me having to pick up extra shifts, sometimes double and triple shifts, all while going to class and studying. I later learned that this was a pattern for him. The guy would be really dedicated to whatever he set his heart on, but then he would get bored and fall back into his old habits. He would then find a new passion, rinse, and repeat. I know I should have ended the relationship much sooner, but I held out, hoping he would snap out of it, that maybe this was just exam stress getting to him. I desperately wanted things to go back to how they were, but it wasn't meant to be. I caught him cheating and threw him out. At the time, I was so stressed with everything that it wasn't until the next day that our joint savings account crossed my mind. There was a little over £5,000 in there. A few hundred was from him, but the rest was money that I had saved. I then checked the bank account and it was all gone. My ex had cleaned out the account and moved into a new flat with his side chick. It was then I called the bank. Since it was a joint account and he was an authorized holder of the account, there was nothing they could do. I then contacted police hoping they could do something, but they too told me there was nothing they could do. They told me since it was a joint account, nothing criminal had happened. They suggested taking it to civil court, but they said I'd probably spend more money than I got back in legal fees, so it likely wasn't worth it. My ex had stolen £5,000 and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt like such an idiot. I got even angrier when I saw his post boasting about his new game consoles, new games, new TVs, and new gadgets, all bought with my money that I saved up. Now, I'm usually not a vengeful person. I'm petty on occasion, sure, but I've never wanted to exact revenge as much as I did right then and there. And I knew just how to do it. So while I was a student, I attempted every summer to help pay for my studies. One such job had been for a debt collection agency. The work was as crappy as you can imagine, but it paid really well. I knew my ex had been dodging debt for many years, and he was very proud of that fact. He was also proud of the fact that his debt was close to being statute barred, and he hadn't paid a penny. Now, for those of you who don't know, in the UK, creditors have about 6 years to collect a debt, and then it becomes statute barred. This means the money is still owed, but creditors have no legal way to enforce payments, such as using bailiffs. My ex was a few months away from reaching that status. However, what a lot of people don't know is that making a payment on that debt resets the clock. If you pay any amount, then that 6 years starts from scratch. Now, previously, I had used my insider knowledge to help him dodge the debt. Now, that wasn't good, I know. Now, I would use it to hit him where it hurt. So by the end of the relationship, I was handling everything. Monthly rent, utilities, credit card payments, including his debts. I had the paperwork, so I knew who he owed and how much. So I call his creditors up. I was honest, and I said I was a friend calling to make a payment on his behalf. I didn't pretend to be him because that would be a big no-no. They weren't allowed to disclose any details, but with the account number, they were able to take a payment. I then paid the minimum allowed on each debt, the absolute lowest amount that they would take, about £1 on most, but one had a minimum payment of £1.50, and that was the best $8.50 I've ever spent in my life. I also made sure to give them his new address and contact details, as well as his parents' address. Having worked in the business, I knew they wouldn't change the address since I wasn't the account holder, but they would note it. They had various systems where they could search for his names against that address, and if anything came up or if they got a hit, they would change the address. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait. So a few months rolled by, and then it happened. His posts on the forums went from boasting about his new gaming PC to absolute panic about a court date. The guy calls me and begs me for advice since he knew I'd be able to help him, and I told him to F off. So seeing I wouldn't help, he then goes to ask for advice online. One of his online friends told him to not turn up to court. That way, they wouldn't be able to prosecute him without him there. Of course, that was terrible advice that was 100% untrue. In fact, not showing up is one of the worst things you can do, especially in civil courts. This was getting better and better. So the court date comes and goes, and my ex naturally didn't go. A few weeks later, he posts photos of his place completely empty. The bailiffs had cleaned him out and taken every last one of his shiny new gadgets and toys. On top of that, he ends up with several county court judgments. Now these are a big deal, and they can seriously damage your credit history, making it hard to get bank accounts outside of basic ones, near impossible to get credit cards and mortgages, and it can also make it hard to rent a place, since many landlords don't like renting to people with county court judgments, as they're considered high risk. He also won't be able to find jobs in the financial sector, so he's basically screwed. Also, now that he's broke and doesn't have nice things, his side chick left him. I never got my £5,000 back, but it felt good seeing everything he bought with his ill-gotten gains taken away. I hope that $5K was worth it. Oh my goodness, absolutely brilliant revenge on OP's part. And guys, it sucks so much that OP's crummy ex blew that $5,000 on stuff that just ended up getting repoed. And yeah, never ever open a joint bank account with someone who you've just started dating. Okay, so my former boss is the worst human being that I've ever met. The guy's done all sorts of things to mess with anyone he doesn't like. He's crude, he's rude, he doesn't care what he says to others or even how offensive it is. So a while ago, I was walking in the park with a young boy from our family, who's developmentally disabled with Down syndrome. We'll call him Ben. Ben does fairly well, all things considered, but he's always been sensitive to anyone making fun of the way he looks or his condition. We're all just having a good time on the little stroll, and Ben and I are enjoying the day. And that's when I see my boss on the path walking our way. I'll call the guy Rob. I cringe at seeing him anywhere, but I smile and say hello to play nice. Out of nowhere, Rob says, "Ha! There's something you don't see every day. A pair of R-words walking together." Hearing that, Ben bursts into tears and Rob begins laughing and walks off. I deal with Ben and ignore Rob. At this point, I'm super pissed, trying to calm Ben down, because for a few minutes, he was totally distraught. I then saw that Rob was walking towards his family at the park, where his family was having a cookout. I was super pissed, so that's when I went back to my family gathering and I talked to an adult cousin of mine named Jake, telling him what happened. Jake wanted to get revenge on Bob, but I reminded him that this was my boss. I didn't want Rob to be able to know the revenge had anything to do with me, because he'd make my work life even worse than he already had. So that's when Jake asked me for anything I knew about Rob that might help. I told Jake a bunch of things about Rob, but the relevant info here is that Rob always liked to drink a particular kind of locally made beer at a certain bar. Rob had talked about getting drunk there on the previous Friday night while his wife and daughter were away visiting her family. Also, Rob had recently told a story about his wife's obsession with a particular green little fictional character, a baby Yoda. He often told us how his wife kept a stuffed baby Yoda on their bed at all times. With that info, Jake went to work to exact his revenge. Now, I wasn't there for the revenge setup itself because I didn't want Rob to see me, but Jake filled me in on the details afterward. It was basically this. Jake approaches Rob, puts an arm around his shoulders, and tried to kiss him. Rob pushes him off and says, "What are you doing?" And that's when Jake says, "I'm just so excited to see you, sweetie. Friday night was so amazing, but you didn't tell me you had a wife and kids." Rob then says, "What are you talking about? Get away from us." And that's when Jake says, "Seriously, you're gonna act like you don't remember now? I know you were a bit tipsy after all those beers at that bar, but certainly you remembered what happened later." Jake then told me that Rob turned red and called him a lying son of a bitch. And that's when Rob's wife interrupts and says, "Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is my husband. I'm sure you have him mistaken for someone else. Please just leave us alone." To which Jake says, "Oh no, I'm not mistaken. I'm actually furious. He slept with me and he lied. We had the best night ever on Friday, and now he's acting like he doesn't know me." Rob's wife again tries to tell him, "I told you, this is my husband. You're mistaken." That's when Jake says, "Oh, maybe I am. I guess it was someone else who took me back to their place and made love to me all night on the bed next to his baby Yoda. I'm sorry." At that point, Jake turns and walks away. Now, to make a long story a little bit shorter, I guess Rob's wife wasn't really happy with him after that, and apparently that was the tipping point that made her file for divorce soon thereafter. Rob frequently complained at work the following months about how he didn't care about his wife, but he really missed his daughter. Every time he complained about his lack of home life at work, I knew he did it to himself, because he was mean to someone who's disabled. The best part is, he never figured out that I was involved at all. And props to Jake for that wonderful performance, guys. And honestly, I feel like Rob deserved a lot more than a divorce. I mean, who the heck just walks around and says that to a random person? So as an aimless teenager, I started working for a small business owned by Steve. It turns out I really enjoyed what I did, so slowly over time, my life plan shifted to make sure that I could continue working for Steve in the long term. This included transferring to a local college, and because the business was predominantly run on part-time hours, I made sure any other jobs I had never conflicted with the hours that I was expected to work for Steve. Now, Steve was flawed, but he was overall a good boss who mostly looked out for me. Now, the thing is, when I started working for Steve, the business's name recognition was always directed towards Steve. Over the years, it eventually became go to OP. OP's the best. It got to the point where I do indeed truly believe that if I didn't end up working for Steve, it's very likely that his business would have been nowhere near as successful as it eventually became. As the years went on, it was heavily implied that when Steve retired, the business would go to me. It was never specifically stated, but Steve did have a way about skirting around these types of issues and giving me hope. So here's where Kyle enters, the new owner that comes in play. About 3 years before COVID, Steve decides to retire and sell his business. He did indeed fulfill his promise by making a half-assed attempt to sell it to me at such an unreasonable price, but it was very clear that he had another buyer in mind, Kyle. Kyle owned another local business just outside of our market area in the same industry. Because of the way the industry worked, there wasn't much, if any, overlap in potential customers. But Kyle had a very large amount of money and he was willing to buy. So what's important to note here again is that I truly believe that if I didn't play ball and agree to work for Kyle, there was no possible way a sale could go through. Over the course of negotiations, Kyle ends up buying the business and he puts me in charge of running the day-to-day. Something I was mostly already doing, but with a few more administrative tasks tacked to it. The thing is, my name was still the name in town, and Kyle made zero effort to ever be on location, so nobody that did business with us really knew who Kyle was. All was well for a while. Kyle would openly talk about me being the head honcho at my location, and mostly left me alone to deal with my clients in the professional and personable nature that I had learned from Steve. Things first came to a head a year before COVID when Kyle sent me to an industry conference for 4 days. I would need to take time off from my other job, which I was fine with. At the conclusion of the conference, I put in an hour's request for the hours I spent at the conference. I was super nice about it. Now, I should have clocked all hours at the convention each day, but instead, I didn't account for the hours for seminars that I wanted to attend. The request was denied. And I was told industry conferences are enriching activities. We pay for your admission, but they're on your own time. This took 2 weeks to resolve, but ended with me essentially saying, look, I'll still work for you because I love what I do. However, if I don't get paid, I will never go to another one of these conferences again to get new ideas for you. I was immediately paid. I'll spare similar smaller stories of that nature, but that slowly starts to become the relationship between Kyle and I. When COVID hit, our locations were shut down, and for 3 weeks, we weren't able to do anything. Meanwhile, our clients were still paying for our services. And because Kyle had recently moved to a new client payment portal that I hadn't been trained on yet, I wasn't able to help any clients get their money back. At one point, I messaged Kyle about going virtual and still being able to assist clients, and I got a very angry text back full of curses that essentially said, look, you're not the boss. Go F yourself. You had the chance to be the owner and you turned it down. I'm in charge. The big problem is, of course, that I would receive daily texts, emails, and calls from clients about their membership and bills, and there was nothing I could do to help them. It was at this point I knew crap was hitting the fan and I needed to start doing something. So over the course of the next 2 months, I did a couple of things. I spent a large amount of time studying the best business structures. I communicated with all the other staff at my location about my intentions. I continued to give 110% to my clients in a virtual capacity. I then built a website and social media presence from the ground up. I don't think Kyle was expecting any of this. And he also didn't realize that because I often had to do back-end stuff from home, I also had what was essentially a little black book of every client, their email addresses, and their phone numbers. When everything was ready, I waited very patiently to the end of a service month. On the last weekday of the month, I instructed the staff who would be helping clients that day to tell them to check their emails at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I sent an email out to all active clients, as well as a texting service to text everybody. I then launched all of our social media accounts, our websites, and even enlisted a very small amount of trusted clients to spread the word via social media, once I gave them the signal. Within 15 minutes of everything, my phone was ringing off the hook. I had 50 plus emails in my inbox from different people, and my Facebook accounts were completely blowing up with local chatter. I also heard from many of these people that they were calling Kyle to cancel their service. Within an hour of everything, Kyle sends out a text blast to every client that they would be shutting their doors effective immediately. At the start of COVID, we had roughly 50 active clients at the business. On my very first day of the business, I had signed up 75 active clients, and many inactive ones telling me, yeah, we stopped doing business with you guys because Kyle was kind of a dick. What's really important to keep in mind here is that I never wanted to be, nor cared to be, a business owner. I was very happy working for someone else, as long as I wasn't treated like absolute crap. Had Kyle treated me even remotely better, the location would have continued to thrive and be stable in the local community. But Kyle chose to be a dick to try to get quick money and cheat people, and Kyle lost out. We've been in business now for almost 2 years, and we've nearly tripled Kyle's active numbers. And we've continued to be a staple in our community. Guys, I've read so many revenge stories at this point, and honestly, I'll never get sick of reading about new owners coming in and destroying the business by pissing off the one person who's holding the entire business together. So on this day, my uncle was over at my house for my birthday. I compete in competitions, and my uncle's the kind of guy to go to the range once a month. We had gone shooting the previous day and only brought a few guns out because we had some technical stuff to work on, so it wasn't really just a trip to shoot. My uncle surprised me on the trip with some tannerite, which is an explosive you set off by shooting it. So we ended up blowing some stuff up while out there, but saving most of it for the next day. The next day, we were packing up to actually go out shooting for real, instead of spending the day tinkering. My uncle asked me to bring one of my guns that has very expensive and hard to find ammo for him to shoot for a bit. I told him I only had about 20 rounds for it, and I'd like to save them for another day since I don't know if I'd be able to find more. And here's where things start falling apart. Now, my uncle is known to be a bit scummy and a hothead, so he snapped and tried guilting me into bringing the gun, telling me I owe him for the tannerite. I told him I didn't realize that I'd have to pay him back for my gift, and if that was the case, he could just have the remaining tannerite, and then I walked back to my room to start putting away my guns, since I could tell this was pretty much gonna ruin the day. This made him lose his absolute mind. The guy starts yelling and stomping and telling me how I'm being an ungrateful piece of crap, and how he should kick my ass to teach me a lesson. At this point, I tell him to get out of my house if he's gonna threaten me, and he charges up the stairs at me. My uncle's a very large and fit man, so I grabbed the bear spray out of my shooting bag and pointed at him. My uncle's been maced before, so he quickly backs down and left, damaging my door on the way out. So after this, I went about my day, packing up most of the guns, but loading a couple into the car, because I still planned on heading to the range because I'm not gonna let him ruin my fun. As I'm packing up the car, a couple of police cars roll up and they start shouting at me to get on the ground, and they put me into handcuffs. I quickly found out that they were there because my uncle called and said that I pointed a weapon at him and mentioned my guns. I ended up having to show the police the footage from my security camera before they let me go. After that day, I fully cut ties with my uncle, and I just moved on with my life. But I came out to find that he was talking bad about me to my family members, which was when I started plotting my revenge. I knew my uncle illegally stored his restricted guns, and I knew he spent quite a bit of money on them, but I also knew the cops probably wouldn't bother since I had no proof. I also found out that my uncle had been shooting all the animals in his yard when he lives in the city. I found this out from my grandma, who he often brags and sends pictures to. One of the animals was an endangered species, and I knew my grandma's phone had the picture on it, so I eventually snuck onto my grandma's phone and sent myself all the incriminating pictures, including ones of illegal guns, and I reported it to the police. Today's the day my uncle got arrested. Fish and Game seized his cars and his guns, and his wife pretty much left him since the police raid traumatized her and the kids. And all of his gun friends have gone off the grid, so he has no support. The court date and charges are unknown, but from my research, he's looking at a really long sentence. I feel absolutely no remorse because I've always said that I don't think him having access to firearms was safe, because my uncle can be violent and he's overall a crap person. Yeah guys, OP absolutely destroyed his uncle, and I'm glad he was put behind bars. And guys, believe it or not, some people do say that what OP did was overkill and a little too petty. Guys, let me know what you think. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people, where an entitled Karen trespasses on OP's property to destroy stuff. And it doesn't end well. Check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.